Shana Tova. For those who don't know me, I'm Kayla Pincus. I was one of its founding members as basically a baby, celebrated my bat mitzvah here years later, and now, quite a few years after that, I have the honor of leading this morning's Rosh Hashanah service. Thank you all for being here to share this time we have together. We come together at the start of the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah, which opens the 10 days of Teshuvah, or return. Traditionally, these are days of repentance, of confronting wrongs and asking for forgiveness. And of course, there's no shortage of wrongs to look at in our personal lives, in our country, in Israel, elsewhere in the world. But today, I don't want to catalog them. During a time when I often find myself feeling that all may be lost, I want to focus us on where I believe the real work begins, which is one layer deeper. How we approach this time, how we hold guilt and grief in a way that's constructive rather than paralyzing. So the focus of this hour isn't on a list of sins. It's on the verb of these 10 days, on how to approach the turning, remembering, and strengthening that this season calls us into. I hope this can feel like a guide, a way to carry the work in a way that feels possible, maybe even hopeful. First, in our service today, we'll begin by turning inward with mindfulness and self-trust. Second, we'll reflect on memory and inheritance, the gifts and scars we carry. And third, we'll turn to strength and systems, how compassion ripples outward into accountability and peace. So there's a breathing exercise that I'm going to ask us to do a number of times during this service. It's called box breathing. So what we're going to do is we breathe in for 4 counts, we hold for 4 counts, we breathe out for 4 counts, and we hold for 4 counts. And I can do the fingers, you guys can do them. So we're going to do one now together. All right. We're going to breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, and exhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4. So we begin with turning inward. And let's be honest, that can be terrifying. Many of us avoid being alone with ourselves because we're afraid of what we'll find, afraid that maybe we're bad at our core, or that sitting with our mistakes will reveal something rotten. But what if the opposite is true? What if we're more okay than we think? Not perfect, but complex, with more goodness and decency in us than we often give ourselves credit for. Mindfulness meditation is basically a training practice for being present. Those somewhat familiar with the activity often think successful mindfulness meditation occurs with perfect, unwavering focus on our breath until the timer rings. On the contrary, the muscle is built when we notice we've strayed, when we meet that moment with compassion rather than judgment, thereby setting the stage to return to our warm, welcoming selves. That act, the response to having strayed, is the protein, the weightlifting, the soul building. Cynicism may masquerade as realism, but cynicism is often just a way of leaving ourselves, assuming the worst. Real strength, real freedom, is the courage to come home. Teshuvah is translated as return or coming back. Perhaps teshuvah, like mindfulness, is not a once-annual heroic act, but a constant practice of returning. And this practice builds a muscle we'll need later when we face memory and accountability. In my work as a sentencing expert, I've had to look as deeply as possible into the lives of people convicted of the worst crimes imaginable. And even there, I found that if all you can do is see rot, you're not looking very carefully. There is always humanity, a notable term, and goodness at the core. That's not a naive hope. It's the most accurate assessment of reality. And building from that truth is the only strategy strong enough to counter cruelty. The book I heavily quote from throughout this service is Rutger Bregman's Humankind, A Hopeful History. By a show of hands, how many of you have read Lord of the Flies? Is that everyone? Okay. Are you familiar with the book? Are you familiar with the concept? Right. So, Humankind, A Hopeful History is a history book. It's a very thick book. But basically, the premise is that story, that Lord of the Flies story, it's a fiction story. For many years, it was required reading in schools. What Rutger Bregman, the author of this book, does is he goes through these instances, such as the Lord of the Flies story, finds the real version of when that thing occurred, and explores what the outcome of that was. And in reality, what happened, there were these boys that were trapped on an island, and they did not leave the island worse off. In fact, in this specific instance, and wherever this island was, however many years ago, very similar to that book, they left stronger than they did when they got on the island. And so he goes through many instances that are kind of that vein. That basically it's required reading in schools to learn about a fiction of humanity, something that's very cynical, very negative, but in reality, the truth is quite optimistic, quite positive about human nature, right? And the idea, of course, is that children are the closest to being our natural selves. That's why it's so striking in the fiction book that these kids kind of eat each other literally one after the other. So the book basically goes through a number of these scenarios and tries to reframe how we see humankind. So I'll be referencing it a number of times. People often use be realistic as a warning against hope, as if cynicism were strength, or as if the worst scenario has more gravity than all else. For those who remember how fractions work, I call this the worst common denominator fallacy. It's an encouragement toward dissociation and distancing from ourselves and others, because who wants to spend time around members of a hopeless species, ourselves included? But realism means seeing that we are a mixture of things. Teshuvah and mindfulness ask us to rest assured. If you go deeply enough into yourself or into others, you need not be afraid. You will always find goodness. I once gifted Humankind, A Hopeful History to a young political figure, hoping it might shape the way he carried his power as he rose. I inscribed the following words: be realistic should be just as likely an encouragement as a dissuasion. This line is at once a reflection of truth and a kind of prophecy. So let's hear a few voices that remind us of this, that our core may be more trustworthy than we've been taught to fear, and that both as individuals and as a species, we might be more decent than we give ourselves credit for. That just maybe it's okay to stay a while. So we're going to get into some of our readings here. Do I have a volunteer for our first reading, which is actually going to be reading 8 from the handout? Short? Yep. Right behind you. Thank you. So we're going to do our box breath. And that just means we're going to breathe in for our 4 counts. We're going to hold for our 4 counts. We're going to exhale for 4 and pause for 4. And 1, 2, 3, 4. Pause. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Pause. 2, 3, 4. Long before modern theories of selfishness, our ancestors lived in systems of sharing. Generosity is not an anomaly, it's our inheritance. We're going to move on to our second reading, which is actually reading 1. Yeah, go ahead, volunteer. I'm going to bring you the microphone. Thank you. So another question here. How many people are familiar with the Milgram experiment? Yes. How many of us, by a show of hands, are familiar with the Milgram experiment? Yeah, of course. I gotcha. So basically, in the 1960s, and this was after the Holocaust, people were really trying to understand human nature, how such a thing could have happened as the Holocaust and other atrocities throughout history. And so this, I believe he was a social psychologist, did a study that has now become very famous, and again, is something that is taught and taught and taught everywhere. It's a very, very popular study to learn about, not just in psychology courses, but just in general. And so it's a little bit complex, but basically, you had a person come into a room, they sit down, there's a glass in front of them. On the other side of the glass, in the other room that's connecting, is a person who is sitting there tied down and has wires attached to him. And basically, there's another person who comes in wearing a lab coat and instructs the initial one who had come in to press a button. That button supposedly is sending a shock to the person in the other room. There are a number of buttons that increase in severity of the shock as time goes on. And the story goes that people just listened, that you press the first button and the person gets a little shock, not much. Maybe there's no reaction. Then the person in the lab coat says, okay, now press the next one. And then the person does it, next one, and it goes on until ostensibly the person on the other side of the room is electrocuted. Now, the idea here was that people are taught that this means that people will just follow instructions, like the SS, whatever, that people will just follow what an expert in a lab coat or whatever it is tells them to do. An authority figure really was the idea. And so we're gonna learn a little bit about that now. Alan, if you don't mind reading, this is reading number 2. Thank you. So very few people know about this addition. And yet, again, we are taught time and time again that human nature is abominable in some way. I think that the reality is that our core is not rotten, and at the very least is a mixture of things. This next piece I'm going to read because I wrote it. And I'll just get into it. It's called Good and Bad, Part 1 of Infinity. Aren't we all just scared of misstepping? Aren't status and power and money and influence just shortcuts to road signs to direct those of us taught to ignore ourselves how to stay on course? Who is safe? How to stay safe? If the road has been traveled by most, it is agreed upon. It is trusted. Trusted. Trusted is an adjective describing a thing trusted as a verb by something, someone, someone's. I would rather trust someone's trusted judgment to tell me who to trust than to trust me. Everything feels at stake if we follow the wrong road signs and arrive at the wrong destinations. It's terrifying to be searching, lost, during the process as we walk along, wondering if we're following the wrong road signs, all the while searching outside, which is already the wrong direction. Poem. We're going to do a box breath here. I'm not going to say it this time, so I can do it with us. And go. All right. Thank you. So, again, this section is really all about how we return to ourselves, how we stay present. So, I'm going to ask if anybody wants to answer to raise your hand, and we'll bring the mic over to you. What helps you return to yourself when you feel that you have strayed? Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. Well, we'll move on. Um, Teshuvah is practice, not performance. Not one perfect act of return, but the steady courage of coming back again and again. And it begins with self-trust, the radical act of believing we're worth returning to. We now move on into the second section of memory and inheritance. We often talk about anti-Semitism as politics or history, as something distant, even when we name it as a modern phenomenon. We take up arms against it. But how many of us have ever gone to therapy because of it, or brought our families together to face it? How many of us have sat with ourselves or each other and actually said out loud how much it hurts, or how it's shaped the way we see ourselves? When trauma isn't named, it doesn't disappear. It looks for somewhere to go. And often it goes inward. The pain of being hated from the outside can twist into self-criticism and self-doubt on the inside. Women know women can be some of the most sexist people. Racial minorities know they can be their own harshest critics. Why? Because the world that hates you gets to go home at night, to rest after its cruelty. But we never go home from being us. Whether it's gender, race, religion, it's us that is the target, us that is the scapegoat. And so, of course, it makes a kind of logical sense that we turn on ourselves. Part of that self-turning is a reflection of the standards of excellence we hold ourselves and others to. But we cannot pretend that's all it is. Sometimes it's distortion, inherited pain turned against ourselves. And here is the danger. The ritual of tashlich, casting our sins into the sea, can be misread as permission to believe the waters carry them away. But what we cast off doesn't vanish. Even crumbs transform the chemistry of water. We pass it on. To imagine otherwise is not only naive, it is dangerous. This is the heart of generational trauma. What is not faced becomes the burden of ourselves and those who come during and after us. Memory in this light is the courage to face what we carry, the gifts and the scars, and to hold them honestly and without judgment. In Teshuvah, we practice gratitude simply for noticing them. We look them in the face with compassion as we prepare, once again, the warm, welcoming bed of self and home to which we return. That is how we don't spill outward. Our prayer book reminds us that memory isn't only about pain. It's also about resilience, about what we've inherited that gives us life and vision. If I could have another volunteer, we're doing reading 5. Yep, in the back. Thank you. Thank you. This text lifts up the dignity of memory, that our ancestors live in us. What they created still moves through us. It reminds us that remembering is not just about wounds, but also about strength, about the vision and life force that keep flowing into us. The next piece speaks more personally to that complicated inheritance, the shame, the grief, and the possibility of redirecting it toward compassion. I am going to read this one again because I wrote this one as well. We are on reading 4. How am I doing? What I'm doing is practicing me, being me, caring for me, loving me. How I'm doing at it is on a scale of 1 to 10, a me, learning to grow into who I am rather than who I am not. How am I doing? 80 years ago, almost every person in my family and every person they knew and loved was murdered. How am I doing? I'm using the money I inherited from my grandparents, and I'm cashing it out on me in a way. And in another way, I'm investing it into time to heal the pain, the fear, the hate, the scarcity, the bravery, the parts of our brains and our bodies that we had to strengthen and harden and fortify so that no one could get in, so that we would not break from existence, that we keep passing down to each other and that touches everyone we touch. How am I doing? I am bouncing between victim and villain and hero, and none of those are real people. How am I doing? I'm trying to stop putting quick resumes on my feelings. I'm trying to stop performing for you. I'm trying to know that I will be a person who saves and a person who hurts and a person who hurts, no matter what, because I take up space. Not a lot of it, and sometimes a lot of it. How am I doing? How? I am taking up space by living from the inside out and a little from the outside in. And I'm doing it well, I guess, depending on how you define it. Oh, it's me defining it? Well, I'm afraid of stepping on anything and making mistakes and hurting people, but I'm knowing that I hurt us every time I order another shirt from Amazon. So I'm trying to find balance because I know there are so many people in need and so many people who need me or someone like me, but maybe me with this brain and these feelings and this love that a beautiful spirited woman long ago gave me by chance. How am I doing? I'm spending this money I inherited from my grandparents, and I'm filled with shame about it. I've been afraid to tell you that that's basically how I'm living right now. I don't have a normal job right now. I'm really afraid of what you'll think of me. Maybe that I'm not a real person, that I don't belong here, that I'm not deserving of your presence. But I think that a kinder and arguably more accurate way of saying it is, I'm investing the money I inherited from my grandparents in me, and I'm combining it with the love she gave me, and I'm trying to see if it will yield a dividend much greater than the sum of its parts. I'm investing this blood, sweat, tears, and literal money into my present and my future. I'm trying to see if I can stop passing down and passing in and passing out a hurt people's hurt, a pain people's pain. I'm trying to see if we can take all this power and redirect it toward compassion. How am I doing? Poem. We're going to do another breath here. I'm not going to count them, but ready and... All right. Zichronot, the call to remember, isn't about erasing what we've been given, but about deciding how to hold it. Even tashlich, casting away, isn't about pretending sins are gone. The die is already cast. Every act has already seeped into the water, already rippled outward. The fish in that water are the people around us, the ones who end up swimming with what we've released, whether that's harm or compassion. In this sense, release is not erasure. It is resituating. It is holding what we carry differently from the new strength we've been building and with the grace that comes from compassion. And here's what makes these holy days matter. They are the pause that lets us notice what has been released, what's rippling outward, and how we might hold it differently moving forward. An inheritance isn't only what our ancestors or the world before us handed down, it's also what our past selves have handed to us. Everything we've thought, done, achieved, and survived up to this very moment. All of that is part of the sea we swim in. The question is not whether we carry it, but how. Memory becomes a source of healing when we refuse to turn away from any part of it. Trauma and resilience, gifts and scars. And choose with honesty and compassion what kind of inheritance we will pass forward. I'm going to ask a quick question if anybody wants to think about an answer here. Is there a memory of inheritance you hold that shapes who you are today? Thank you. All right, so we're going to move on to our final section here, strength, empowerment, and systems. Machzor, which means cycle, is the name of our High Holy Day prayer book. These prayers return with us every year. It's a reminder that we move through life in circles, not once and done, but returning again and again, like teshuvah, like mindfulness. And in the Machzor, we find the words Hayom Harat Olam. Today, the world is born. I don't hear that as a claim about one date on the calendar. I hear it as a marking of what is always happening. The world is being born all the time through the choices we make, the ripples we send outward. These holy days call us to notice it. And that's hard to do when our sense of self feels fragile. And even gentle criticism can feel unbearable. Someone says, "You hurt me." And instead of hearing it as an opportunity to grow, we crumble into self-defense. We can't rest assured that we are still okay, still safe, still ourselves. We confuse a behavioral wrong with being wrong at our core. This is why we practice compassion toward ourselves. It builds the muscle that lets us bend without breaking, the way healthy muscles grow stronger not by never straining, but by being stretched and then restored. Compassion, practiced again and again, is what fortifies us to hold accountability without collapsing under it. Rosh Hashanah, as I see it, comes before Yom Kippur because we need that foundation of strength, celebration, and joy before we can bear the full weight of atonement. The ripple of our choices is never contained to ourselves. The butterfly effect says that even small actions can set off waves with consequences we may never see. When trauma goes unaddressed, its ripples pass outward into others. When compassion is chosen, its ripples do the same. This, to me, is what Hayom is naming. The world is being born through those ripples, not just once a year, but continually. Before we move forward, let's pause inward for a moment. And if anybody has any answers to this question, what's one way you've seen compassion ripple outward in your own life? Thank you. All right, we're going to keep it moving. So this is where my definition of peace comes in. I formed this definition at Seeds of Peace, a summer camp in Maine for Israelis, Palestinians, Egyptians, Jordanians, and Americans. It says this: peace is not the utopian absence of conflict. Peace is a situation in which problems can and do arise, as is necessarily the case where there is diversity, but there is a trusted system for fixing them. That applies to governments, to communities, to families, and to the systems inside each of us. Teshuvah and mindfulness expand outward into macro systems, and strong systems expand inward to fortify us in turn. Both depend on the same principle: the ability to bend without breaking, to see growth not as an obstacle, but as strength. going to read this next poem, which I also wrote. It's called Sky Candy. To reach for candy in the sky is to quash the person who sits on her living room floor, laundry in a pile, trying to accept herself for who she is today. Is there a way to reach in a way that's not for candy? To reach while keeping feet planted, gravity strong, to love the ground upon which she stands, while letting it go, as she walks, as she runs forward. Everywhere she goes, there she is. When is she running forward and when is she running away? Is she running away or running toward? How does she accept and grow? Grow in a way that's not a form of self-hatred or betrayal, but is instead a form of self-love, to grow into who she is rather than who she is not. Poem. This poem reminds us that growth is not self-betrayal. The real betrayal is cutting off parts of ourselves under the guise of strength. Growth, if done right, makes us more whole. Self-love, the practice of strengthening the self, is how we actually prepare to meet the world's demands with steadiness. If I could have a volunteer for reading number 9. If anybody also on Zoom would be interested in reading, just let us know. Yeah, in the back. Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to do these in somewhat quick succession, so you might want to stay standing or not, whatever you'd like. This echoes the same point. To injure is not to improve, to punish is not to transform. Systems like people must be built for growth, not cruelty. Our next reading is number 7. If we could have a volunteer here or on Zoom, would be great. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you. The one we feed lives in our hearts and our systems. If we design systems that reward greed and fear, this is what multiplies. If we design systems that reward compassion and trust, that is what multiplies. Accountability is not about crushing what we fear in ourselves or others, but about nurturing the parts of us that can grow. Taking account is an act of love and cultivation. And now for reading 10. Anybody on Zoom or, yeah, Ellen, if you want to take it. Just make sure to stand and be loud or sit. Thank you. And this is why a hopeful view of humanity is not naive, but radical. It destabilizes systems of fear and control. To say that humans are okay beings, ourselves included, is to insist that it is safe to come home to ourselves. Hope is subversive to harm. Hope is strength. And our last reading here, reading 11, if anybody wants to do reading 11 or anybody volunteering on Zoom. Thank you. Let's do a breath. All right, ready? And this is where it all lands. We build strong houses for our identities, not so they become prisons, but so their doors can be open. The same is true of peace. It is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of trusted systems, in my definition. in our inner lives, in our relationships, and in our world. Systems that can bend without breaking, people who can bend without breaking. Each act ripples outward into that sea, shaping the water we all swim in. So we return to the beginning. We fortify ourselves with compassion in order to bear accountability. We put on our oxygen mask. We fill our cup. We rest assured that we are safe to learn, safe to grow, safe to contribute. True self-love is heroic because it makes us reliable in the machinery of collective peace. And when we say Hayom Harad Olam, today the world is born, I understand it as a ritual reminder of what is always true, that the world is being born through us, again and again, in the small daily acts of teshuvah, of mindfulness, of coming home to ourselves. We have a little bit of extra time, so I'm going to, before I close, I'm going to read a poem that I wrote. It's very personal, and I will say I don't have a very structured mindfulness meditation practice, despite my affinity for the topic. And I guess the point of that is just that is the point that I've been making, right? We're not perfect, and this is an evolving thing. So with that being the case, a lot of the things that I've said, while I always make efforts to live them out, I am fallible and struggle with these things. So this is called the arbiter's adjudication. Adjudication is what we await. My brother, my kin, the person closest to being me of all the people in the world. We await the decision from a still yet unknown entity to tell us, twins, which is the criminal. We move through the world forgiving the unforgivable in others, the price of which paid in self-hatred and self-abandonment. What goes up must come down. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. The pain we forgive from others paid for in pain we give to one another, to self. I can't wait for the judge to tell you you've been the enemy to me and to you for all these years. It will give me the satisfaction, the resolve, the settlement inside that I am in such pain, that the pain is real, the gift of real and not imagined pain, as you so adamantly believe it to be. And you await the same, the arbiter's adjudication, some third party, someone outside of us to tell us what we are, to define us in a way that can never be refuted, can never impose nuance upon us, black and white truth, a settlement that one or both of us is the monster, to locate, to isolate, to capture this monster. Maybe then we can find a way to move on, to experience each other's gifts, to experience our own. We are the two people in the world closest to being the same, and we punish ourselves with distance. Poem. We're going to do a breath. And the obvious response to a cruel world is to fight. We do that work, it matters. But there is another less obvious exertion that is equally, often more radical: to build. To take the fierce energy that wants to tear things down and redirect it toward fortifying ourselves, our relationships, and our institutions. That means practicing compassion so we can hold accountability without collapse. It means putting on our oxygen mask and tending our own cup so we actually have something to offer. It means growing habits and systems that bend under stress and learn not to break and punish. If enough of us do that, we change the gravity of the room. We become so steady, so reliably abundant that the structures of fear and scarcity begin to look unnecessary. And even those who profited from fear start to see a different, more humane way forward. In that sense, growth is not surrender, it's strategy. It's how we subvert the world's cruelty by outbuilding it. So this Rosh Hashanah, may we have the self-compassion to bend without breaking, the strength to be accountable, and the courage to imagine new growth. May we be strong enough to hold it all: memory and accountability, trauma and compassion, criticism and hope, with grace. And in coming home to ourselves, may we ripple outward into a more peaceful world, a peace that, beginning always now, begins with us. When I say, may the peace we build, we will all say together, start with us. May the peace we build start with us. May the peace we build start with us. May the peace we build start with us. Shana Tova.